With the release of iPhone 6s back in 2015, Apple revealed the 3D Touch as a brand new, groundbreaking way of using and controlling an iPhone, something we've never seen before, only for them to stop supporting it just a few years later. Apple can of course justify why they removed it, but was this feature really useless? Was it just a gimmick, or was it actually useful? First of all, a gimmick is a trick or something that attracts people and lures them into buying a product that could work just as good without the gimmick. And it's interesting because this is exactly what happened. An iPhone worked just good before 3D Touch came along, as well as after they discontinued it. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. It cannot be just a random, weird, useless feature, right? The 3D Touch was first released as part of the iPhone 6s, and to be clear, it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, improvement compared to the previous iPhone 6. Well, when you compare these devices side by side, they're not really that different. 6s is built out of tougher material to prevent bending that happened with the 6. There's a new color, a better performance, and improved camera being 12 megapixels instead of 8, but most importantly, 6s has one major new feature, the 3D Touch. This was the biggest thing. But what is it really? 3D Touch is basically the ability of a device to sense the pressure you're applying when pressing the screen. And because the iPhone knows whether you just lightly tap the screen or apply force and firmly press it, the software can perform different actions, entirely based on the applied pressure. Cool, right? But it's not entirely new. The Apple Watch has always had something similar. The Apple Watch, since the first generation, already featured pressure-sensitive display. Although it wasn't called 3D Touch, but instead Force Touch. But it's very similar in the way it works. And interestingly, the first original Apple Watch was released in 2015, the same year when the 6s got launched. So Apple clearly adopted this technology around this time and decided to implement it to the iPhone as well. During the September Apple event in 2015, Craig Federighi was demoing the 3D Touch on stage, showing that you can peek at your emails and pop if you want to open it full screen, or 3D touching icons on the home screen, but he also mistakenly referred to it as Force Touch.
Of course, Force Touch or 3D Touch is in,
meaning that it's really very similar even internally at Apple. To be fair, it's not completely the same thing, because while 3D Touch has 3 levels of input, meaning you can perform light, medium, or firm press, that's the reason why it's called 3D Touch by the way, the Force Touch only has 2 levels, so only regular touch and firm press. Apple seemed to genuinely believe in a 3D Touch. They promoted it heavily, not only during the introduction where Craig showcased all the possible ways you can use it, but also at pretty much every occasion they could. The promo videos about this iPhone were mostly about a 3D Touch. It was the #1 thing about that iPhone. Just like the iPhone X is known for its new design and no home button, 3D Touch was iconic for the 6s. They even installed 3D Touch tables in some of their Apple stores. These were like the regular tables with iPhones on top, but there was also a display under the phones, and whenever you pressed hard on the screen of the iPhone, the table underneath played an animation. It was kind of fun, and the point was to show you and make you try out how 3D Touch works in real life. So it really seemed like it's a revolutionary way of interacting with the smartphone. This all seems fine until in 2019, Apple completely removed this feature from the iPhone. With the release of iPhone 11, the 3D Touch simply disappeared. Well, it was also removed from the iPhone XR 1 year earlier, but that was considered to be a budget iPhone, so it sort of made sense. But why would Apple discontinue such a great new feature? It makes no sense, right? Well, there was a problem, or a few problems. Although it seemed awesome on stage as Apple announced it, in the real life of users, 3D Touch didn't play a very important role. I'm pretty sure every person who bought the 6S tried it out when they got it, but over time, people mostly used the 6S the same way they would use the iPhone 6. 3D Touch wasn't very natural and you had to force yourself to use it. Then next year, when the iPhone 7 got launched, there were other new things about that device. So even though it still featured 3D Touch, it was no longer promoted that much by Apple. The same thing with the iPhone 8, 10, and so on. Without the promotion of 3D Touch, some users literally had no idea that the feature even exists. It's an unnecessary feature, meaning that you can do everything just as good with or without the feature. Apple, noticing that customers don't appreciate it that much, while it costs them money to implement the 3D Touch technology and the display layer takes some space inside the device, they decided to stop producing pressure-sensitive displays. They tried it for a couple of years and seeing that it's not very successful, they just dropped it. Well, not completely though. Right now, you can do pretty much all the things you could do with the 3D Touch, even using regular non-pressure sensitive display. That's because Apple replaced 3D Touch with Haptic Touch. Haptic Touch is entirely software-based, unlike 3D Touch, which is hardware-based. Haptic Touch is basically a long press that activates the same things that used to be activated using 3D Touch. When you do perform them, you get a haptic feedback from the Haptic engine inside the iPhone, but it's really just a long press. But the question is now, if it's the same, why does it matter? First of all, it's slower. The iPhone needs to wait a bit to recognize a long press, whereas with pressure sensitivity, you can just click firmly right away. And even right now, if you put the iPhone XS and iPhone 12, for example, next to each other, the iPhone 10 will literally perform certain tasks faster because it has a different layer in the display panel, enabling 3D Touch. Haptic Touch feels much slower and less premium, and it's not as satisfying to use. And also, Apple didn't want the older devices to feel more premium, so they did what they could to diminish the way 3D Touch can be used. So not only newer devices don't get 3D Touch, even the older ones that already have it cannot really use it anymore. They obviously cannot remove the hardware, but they can get rid of it using software, to a degree at least. Okay, so was it a gimmick? Well, there were some very gimmicky apps like a scale which allowed you to place something on the screen and sort of weigh it. I mean, there was no way something like this could work reliably. But I don't personally think that it was a gimmick. I liked the feature a lot. My point is that for a majority of people, for the average user, it didn't mean anything. It had no importance. Most iPhone users had either no idea that it exists or didn't care enough about it. So Apple dropped it, which is understandable. But a certain category of people, someone more technical or interested in tech, may actually be upset about it, including me. Will Apple bring it back? I highly doubt it. But we'll just have to forget about 3D Touch, I guess. Or think of it as a nice chapter in the history of the iPhone. Thanks a lot for watching until the end, and see you guys in the future.